And now for something completely different.
So,
Totally different.
you guys are experts.
Absolutely.
Self-proclaimed, yes.
Yes. Hey, it's still an expert, according to today's way of thinking. So, we thought we'd talk a little bit today about the idea of being an expert. What is an actual expert or expertise? You know, should we be listening to experts? Can there be self-proclaimed experts? You know, I mean, we all know what an expert is, right?
Do we?
Someone with
That's
expertise
hard to
on
say.
topic.
Well, how's that joke go? An
definition.
expert X is oh shoot, how's that joke go? X is former, and a spurt is a little drip of water, or something like that. I forget how it goes. There's some joke around that. I forget. That was probably a bad dad joke that just failed. But.
So I definitely have a ton of respect for actual expertise, for actual experience and know-how and the ability to apply things, and even more the ability to teach those things to other people, to share knowledge. What I have a hard time with is the way experts say is used so often. Probably a few dozen times a week, even if you just scroll the headlines, it's experts say. And that's really what I want to break down a little bit. Just getting into that. Should we pay any attention to that? Should we push back against that idea of, well, this is what the experts say, so do this? Does that make sense?
Well,
yeah,
you're starting right out with a logical fallacy, right? That's a defer to authority, logical
appeal to authority.
Yeah. It's like just
we've heard
question right off.
Well, we've heard a lot of it in the last 2 years, of course, and I mean, here we are. We're going to get into COVID.
Bring out today!
Oh boy!
And you know, but we've heard that for a lot of years. The CDC says, you know, the WHO says, and that is what a lot of the governments based the restrictions, the lockdowns, all of that, you know, the mask wearing, everything on. So this is something I think that is pretty applicable, you know, to think about, especially since a lot of those things have somewhat been proven wrong. So I think that kind of highlights that just because you're in a position of authority doesn't necessarily make you an expert. You know, if you're head of the CDC, that doesn't necessarily mean you're an expert. I think we always need to look at where does the source of that expert's knowledge, quote unquote expert's knowledge, originate from, or where does their authority on that subject originate from?
Yep. And I would even go so far as to state that anyone in a leading position, the figurehead of a large institution, especially a government institution, is perhaps less likely to be a true expert, a true master of their profession, simply due to the fact that what they've been doing for their career is clawing to get their way up to the top of the ladder.
That's right. Clawing up the bureaucratic ladder. Yeah.
So that means they're primarily a politician if they've won themselves that post. So immediately, I think I have some skepticism about their motives, about whether or not they're beholden to anyone. That doesn't mean I dismiss everything they say, but it means I'm going to definitely use discernment and critique what they're saying. And definitely, if there's obvious motivation to frame things a certain way or adopt a certain viewpoint, then I'm definitely going to point that out.
And even just looking at it and holding it up to the flame of what's actually going on, you know, it's just like we say with crypto, you know, do your own research. Like we've got such a wealth of information with the internet. Oftentimes it's just a few clicks and you can, well, with some discernment, like Dan said, you can find things to either confirm or deny. And then but then it becomes the filtering out process of the information that you're reading. Because I know when, 2 years ago, when everything started, everything that was generally thought to be and held up to, this standard, like this is where the information came from, right? And like now all of a sudden it's just, you're drinking from the fire hose of all this information that's like, everyone's saying one thing or the other and nothing is lining up. And then, some people are getting stripped of their roles. Like there was nowhere to really trust. Like the trust was absolutely gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like
well,
from
I think
the supposed experts.
Yes, that's right. Well, if we look back in history, because I'm a history buff, so I look at a lot of these things as they evolve over history. And there was a time in the past when the media, for example, was generally trustworthy. When Dan Rather got on the TV or on the radio and said, "This is what's going on, folks," you generally could trust those were the facts. And they were just the facts. There was no agenda there. I think we saw that a lot with, doctors and scientists and things like that. It was very much, well, this is the scientific method and I followed the scientific method and these are the conclusions I've come to. I think a lot of that has been lost because of money, because of currency, because of government. Like once again, government's ruined stuff. Government has, started funding research and funding this or that. And what happens is now there's an other incentive to maybe not strictly follow the data, or maybe be selective about the data. Things like that, where maybe they're not outright saying, "Hey, this, we're just going to tell a lie." We're just going to fudge the numbers. We're just going to leave out some of this information. And who's going to know? Because we're the experts, and we have generations of people who CNN is the news. Just like the CDC is the science. Right. And
capital S.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that as those things have moved away from the scientific principle and actually just reporting facts that does not have an agenda or a message, a subtle message, people haven't adapted with it because people grew up trusting. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. And we have the tool of the internet to be able to actually go and do our own research now. Not that everything on the internet is true, but it is probably one of the greatest inventions for doing your own research as we've ever had,
Yeah, the best, source of published information.
Yeah, exactly.
And, certainly a lot of garbage in there as well. So at some point, I'd love to touch on the responsibility side of this, and whether or not people can be trusted with this. But you mentioned statistics, and the framing really is important. Even if you don't outright manipulate them, as Mark Twain said, there are 3 types of lies: damned lies, and statistics. Anybody who's good at statistics can simply pull the numbers they want out of there. And
that's right.
Present the case they want to make. And I really think starting with a follow the money type of investigation can definitely lead to some insights. And looking for opposing sources, looking for the other experts, because things are never one-sided. If they are, it's a cult. It's not science. It's a cult. First sign.
Here
are
we
you drinking
are,
Kool-Aid?
all of us agreeing with each other.
It's only 3 of us, though. So, but I actually think we would probably take a few different sides on this. Like, I might be more skeptical of the history of media, whereas Owen felt more positive about it. But either way, as I mentioned, personal responsibility. I think that is a person's responsibility to have a basic understanding and at least to sort out who's the more trustworthy source. And that doesn't mean you then believe everything they say. That is also faith. As I mentioned, the cult thing. It's a continued filtering, keeping a critical eye on what they're saying.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question, was like, when you're talking about like this constant filtering, what are the steps we should take, or the practical applications for when someone says the experts say, or said expert is actually presenting stats or whatever, the process we should go through of determining, like, whatever it is, motive and things like that. Like, what are the steps we should do to kind of filter that out and determine
to think critically, because ultimately what you're asking is, how do I think critically about the information that I receive from other sources? Like, I can think critically of what I observe around me. I go outside and I get wet, so therefore I can critically think and say it must be raining, and if someone says, no, it's not raining, but I'm wet, well, I can use critical thinking and say, I'm not going to trust you what you say because I am experiencing this. So that's one thing. It's another thing when it is information that you're receiving that you don't have necessarily a direct experience or direct experience with. It's not experiential in that way. So that's basically what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
So how do you go about
thinking critically when said expert is being relied on or speaking?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, we could definitely break it down into some steps, such as critiquing for logical fallacies, follow the money, examining opposing viewpoints. But I think it really does start with the mindset, keeping a clear mind. I think the biggest thing you can do for that is not getting emotionally invested in politics, because that's how you get suckered in to spin on a story that is not true.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy, the media says Trump is bad because XYZ. And sometimes it's easy to, maybe you like Trump and you say, well, Trump is good, and because I like Trump, therefore they're wrong, and whatever he was doing was okay. You see that dichotomy in politics all the time, where it's one side says A, therefore the other side says B, period. I think we see that so much in Canada, but it seems especially bad in the US, that dichotomy. So yeah, keeping a clear mind and not getting caught up in that it's your side or my side kind of debate or argument or mentality is important, so that you can actually examine the facts. Following the money, that's another good one. You always want to be you always want to be following the motive, because humans are very much driven by different motives. And you might say, well, the motive of a doctor is to help people, right? That's why they did that, because they wanted to help people. The the motive of me as a plumber is I just love plunging toilets. So, that's, no, I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like there's this idea that motive drives everybody. And so when a university comes out with a study that says, apples are bad for you, you want to look at that, not just the study, but the motive for that. So often these studies might have, maybe these people that do the studies have, financing from, the pear board. And so therefore they're coming out with apples are bad. I don't know. So definitely you have to, but that's hard. Like that's not an easy thing to investigate. And I think that's why people fall back on the experts say, just because that is easy. It's easy to just say, I don't want to have to go do all that independent research. I don't want to have to go, look on the internet and study where these people get their funding from. And I just want to trust what the person says. And there's scenarios we can do that. When someone has a proven track record, then you can start to do that. I think one of the big problems is, I think in the past that a lot of these universities, doctors, scientists, media had some track record. And I think we're realizing they've lost that track record and they're just relying on their coattails, so to speak. Yeah, exactly. I got an idea. This is not an original idea. I stole this from someone else. Maybe you guys have heard it actually. It's another podcaster. The concept of an expert being responsible for the information they put out and the positions and stances they take currently does not really have any consequences. The media can say apples are bad today, and next week can say apples are good and pears are bad, right? And the third week can say, oh, you shouldn't eat apples or pears, cherries are what's in this week, right? And so there's no consequences to that changing of the tune over time. What if you had to put up a stake as an expert? That if you felt you were an expert, you had to stake something, stake money, not just your reputation.
Are we monetizing truth?
We're monetizing truth.
Oh, that's interesting.
Definitely, like if
traditionally it was your reputation. That was what you were putting on the line.
Yes.
And now it doesn't seem to matter very much.
That's right.
And you see more of that appeal to authority as integrity is in question. Then that appeal to authority just becomes pushed more and more, and it's like, no, we are the authority. We are the authority. No, you have to trust us. Yeah, and it's like, no,
exactly.
Whether or not I trust you is my choice. Are you acting in a trustworthy manner?
And I think a lot of people would be much more dedicated in their pursuit of the actual truth and taking a stand on those things if there was real consequences. So if you want to be known, and this person, their idea was, if you want to be an expert on this topic, you feel you are, you need to put up $10,000. And that's your stake. And as you are proven to be correct or incorrect, you either lose your stake or your stake is gained upon. And so it's this idea that by actually pushing the truth and being correct in your field of expertise, you actually can receive something from that. And this could all be done on a blockchain. Funny, we talked about that. You could track all this quite easily on a blockchain. But if you are proven to be wrong or having a bad motive and pushing things that simply aren't true with an agenda, you would lose your stake. And that would almost in some ways be a measurement of your validity as an expert.
Yeah, because reputation's almost completely discredited at this point. Like, it doesn't really matter.
No, that's right. And if you have reputation and you come out with something that's truth, you can be darn sure if it goes against the narrative, they're going to try to ruin your reputation.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Elon Musk tried to buy Twitter, or has bought Twitter.
Tried to. It's on ice right now.
Exactly. And in the name of freedom or free speech, right? That was sort of the way that it was being spun. And the leftists started freaking out a little bit and said, we're going to be shut down. There'll be no more free speech on Twitter because we should be able to ban the people we want to ban. Well, what was the story that came out about 2 or 3 weeks later? Elon Musk was getting charged or reportedly, allegedly being charged with inappropriate behavior to a former employee.
Yep.
Right? So we're going to go after, we can't actually stop Elon from buying Twitter. So let's go after his reputation. Right? And that was predicted. Like, I saw as that whole Twitter thing was going down, someone actually posted, I forget who it was now. And they said, if this goes through, you watch, there'll be a sexual harassment lawsuit against Elon within a month. And sure enough, that's what happened. You know, whether anybody takes that seriously, I don't know. I certainly don't. You know, let me rephrase that. I take it as seriously as the news stories that push it. It may be true, maybe not be true. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it certainly was. Certainly was dirt. It's an allegation.
Seriously, it's like if there's something, then let it go to court.
That's right. But it certainly is one of those things where that would never have come out or have been talked about if the media hadn't made sure it hit the front page.
The motivation for that being splashed around is what you're referring to, not.
Yes.
Yeah. Whether or not
these. Whether or not this is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, I definitely think. I mean, we mentioned the internet being wealth of information, but it's also a psychological battlefield.
Yeah. Yeah, and it takes up so much mental energy just to filter it. Like, I heard this one guy talk about like a 10-step process or 5-step process, basically, that kind of seeks to throttle back the fire hose of information that social media and the mainstream legacy news networks are just constantly pushing at you. And within the first 5 steps, if you're kind of looking at like emotionally detached, like we mentioned earlier, looking for logical fallacies, again, like we mentioned earlier, and then whether or not it pertains to your immediate circumstances in life. And like you can mentally run through, once you get used to the cycle and run through it, you can mentally do an evaluation on a topic or a situation in like 3 minutes, like 1 to 3 minutes, because it never used to be this way. There was never this absolute deluge of information and happenings in the world that made to feel like, oh my goodness, this affects me right now, like I'm in danger. Say there's a tsunami in over in Southeast Asia or something like that, and like now we hear about it, it's like, holy smokes, the oceans are rising, there's going to be a tsunami in the Bay of Fundy in the next 5 years. But in the past, like you wouldn't even know that tsunami happened unless a local newspaper had someone in the area, or you actually traveled to said area and then found out, like, holy smokes, man, you guys are rebuilding what happened. And then they tell you, but it didn't have any impact on, it didn't have any direct impact on your life. And a lot of the things that are happening now regardless of whether it's what an expert is saying or it's just someone spouting nonsense on social media, or it's, CNN or Fox or whoever, or CBC, just spewing more stuff. Like, oftentimes a lot of it doesn't impact us immediately or in our day-to-day life, which, thinking of in terms like of bandwidth or internet, like your brain can only handle so much. Like your brain can only handle your emotional state can only handle so much. So being able to filter that out, think critically about it, evaluate on whether or not it directly impacts you, like that can save your sanity. Just doing like a few steps to kind of filter through what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think it's something we're not used to, either having so many things that are actually not in our immediate but they're eliciting that fear stress response. And definitely, I think it explains a lot of kind of the whole psychology of our cultures, and definitely some of the downward trends, things like increases in depression and poor mental health across the board, all these things.
All right. So any other thoughts on, I feel like this is a topic that we probably will revisit in the future, because I think there's a lot more that needs to be said or could be said on it. But do you have any sort of final
we didn't
summation?
Well, I was going to say, we didn't even touch on like Orwell's 1984 or propaganda or any of that stuff.
Oh, that could be a long talk. The nature of propaganda. A few final thoughts. I would really like to see, Ben used the phrase earlier in the show, with great power comes great responsibility. I would like to see a higher standard for those in positions of power. I mean, you mentioned theoretically ways we could see more consequences, but we have an alleged justice system currently, for what it's worth. And I think if justice was being done, we would see people in positions of power being held to a higher standard. With power should come that responsibility. Instead, we see kind of people getting, free passes again and again.
Well, I think that has to do with the way that and I don't call it a justice system, I call it a legal system. The way the legal system is
more accurate way of putting it.
The legal system is designed because it does in many ways tend to be top down. And so the only way that you can really affect people who are maybe, I don't want to say a higher social standing, but you know what I mean? People who have that protection from tier. They have the protection of the government, and the average person doesn't necessarily have the ability to stand up or the finances to stand up against them. That's why I think something like a monetary sort of staking system would work for that, because I'm sure you could build this quite easily and you wouldn't need it to have it mandated by government, but it would simply be a place where if you want to be an expert, you can go here and stake it, and that means something, and you will be held accountable, and you'll be held accountable in a way that actually financially hurts you. And it would be a way, because it would be on an open blockchain or ledger or something like that, people could go and view it, and it would be public in that way. So the accountability would be there to everybody, so that if the system was compromised, people could see that, in fact, it was compromised. We don't get to see that behind the closed doors of the legal system or the internal workings of government. So
for me, it just kind of, I think of what one of my instructors in college used to say. He's like, how do you eat an elephant? And you eat it one bite at a time. And so I think it starts with individuals starting to take responsibility, holding themselves to that higher standard, and then impacting the people in their families, then their neighborhoods, then communities, and just kind of just building it out from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
That's my final thought.